All right, let's make the internet mad and make a bunch of people yell and scream and beat on their keyboards. And let's just go ahead and do away with the myth that you can over-carburate an engine. And I'm going to show you why. Hang in there.
I'd say it's a nut job.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, or the first thing I'm going to say is tell you this. We're not going to use overcomplicated terms. I want this video to be for the guy that has never put his hands on a carburetor so he can understand things. And a lot of these things, when we start talking about circuits and stuff, it gets overcomplicated. And I think a lot of people overcomplicate this particular issue, and it's very simple. One thing that you will need to know is the term CFM. Carburetors are rated in CFM, 650, 750, 850. There's a lot of 50s out there. 600, 500 CFMs. What does CFM mean? CFM means cubic feet per minute. And it is a rating of how much airflow that carburetor can draw through in 1 minute, or how much airflow can come through that carburetor in a minute. So when you're hearing a term like 650 CFM, 650 cubic feet of air per minute can come through that carburetor. That's the important thing in this whole thing. All right, so now we understand the term CFM. CFM is a reflection of airflow, not fuel flow. Now, hold on. Somebody out there right now screaming already. Just chill out. Let me finish. They are related, but that is not what CFM refers to. CFM refers to airflow. Now, I'm going to try to keep this as basic terminology as you can so that we don't overcomplicate this. There's way too much overcomplication on the internet. So, yes, while I know some of the things I say, the terminology may be a little different. I'm trying to talk to people that don't understand everything about a carburetor, and I'm trying to keep it simple. All right, let's look at this carburetor here. This is a junk carburetor. It's a parts carburetor. It's one I picked up probably for free out of a box and stuff. I've got it on my bench, which is turned into a collect all. These butterflies are even frozen on this one. So this is something that I'll get to eventually one day. But when you hear the term CFM, it is referring to these large openings here. Not these, but the large openings. You follow me? All right. That's what is used when they measure them. Now, how it works is when the air comes through here, these are your boosters where the gas comes out of, or the fuel, E85, whatever you got, comes out of. As this passes, it does a, let's call it a siphoning effect that pulls the fuel out and down into the carburetor or down into the engine. Have you seen, some of us are old enough to where we've had to do it, but have you ever seen anybody siphon gas? Well, have you seen it where they do it with an air compressor? They'll take the nozzle and put a little hole in the end of the hose, and they'll stick it there and blow air out, and then gas starts flowing out. Basically the same thing. As the airflow comes by, it sucks the fuel out of the bowl into the engine, the CFMs. However much airflow it can pass through there, however much airflow you can draw, that's how much more fuel you can pull through to a point. Now, you have jets in a carburetor. Bowls probably never come off of those. Jets are a metered orifice or a metered hole. They're different size holes, which allows that much fuel to go through there. So if you have a 750 CFM carburetor, it flows 750 CFMs of air, and you have a 70 jet in it, well, it's going to flow less fuel than if you had a 80 jet in it because the hole is smaller that the fuel goes through. You understand me so far? I'm trying to keep this layman's terms and very simple. So your fuel is metered by the size of the jet, not the CFM. Now, I will say the more airflow you go through here, the more fuel you can pull. But if you have a 750 here and you put you put an 80 jet in there, a lot of fuel is going through there. But if you put a 70 jet in there, less fuel is going through there, even though it's the same amount of airflow. So you regulate the fuel with your jets. The CFMs did not change. Now, there's a lot of people out there that believe that if you have a 750 or 850 carburetor, it's too much carburetor. You flood it to death. No, the jets control the fuel flow, not the CFMs. The CFMs control how much fuel it can flow, if that makes sense. Not how much fuel it will flow. So, or I should say the rate in which it can flow the fuel, I guess is a more accurate terminology, but I'm trying not to get too technical and too in-depth here. I'm trying to do the basics here so you understand. To test this theory, if you go back to 2 years ago, drag week, I took the wagon to drag week. It was all I had. I'd already signed up, so I took it and run it in the streetcar class. That wagon is a 30 over 302 with a little cam in it, set of headers, an intake. That's it. The wagon's nothing as far as a big cubic inch motor. It's 306 cubic inches. It's nothing. I ran a 950 CFM carburetor on that car. It's all in the video. Drove the car from here to the start of drag week. I didn't do all of drag week, done part of drag week, and then drove the car home. That car with a 302, a 5-speed, and a 300 rear gear. That car got 20 miles to the gallon, and when I got home, those plugs were spotless and clean. Now, according to the internet, that carburetor was way over-carbureted, and that engine would never run with that much carburetor on it. That it would flood itself to death. But that's not true. The tuning is what decides how much fuel goes in. All you're doing with the CFM is how much air you can put through. Now, as I said earlier, this decides how much air the carburetor can flow. If it's a 750, it can flow 750 cubic feet per minute of air through these holes right here, these Venturas, these holes. But that don't mean it does flow that. And I think a lot of people lose it right here. I think this is where a lot of people lose how a carburetor works. So if you do the math, and there's formulas everywhere. It says, how many cubic inches and this and that and all this, and it comes up with a perfect carburetor. First off, that theory is absolute garbage. It's been proven time after time, but nobody wants to hear that because they've believed it so long that they don't want to hear that anymore. But let's say that theory is absolutely golden. And let's say you do the math. And your car, your engine is, basically an engine's an air pump. It pulls air. That's what it does. That's what makes it run. Suck, bang, blow. So how much air it says your engine can pull. And it comes up, the math comes up with 500 CFMs or 550 or whatever. That's all the air that engine can flow. That's it. On its best day, that engine flows 550 CFM. And then people say, well, you can't put a 750 on it. 550. Hold on. 550 is all that thing's going to flow. So if I have a Ventura that can flow 750 CFM, that is capable of it, but if the engine can only draw 500, it's only going to draw 500. This carburetor is not going to magically make the engine flow more. Therefore, since the engine only flows 500, it's only going to draw 500 through here. Now, you will have to change your jets to compensate for this because the amount of airflow that goes through this determines how much fuel it draws out of here. There's less airflow going through here, which means you need to change your jets to compensate for less airflow being pulled through. I'm trying not to overcomplicate this. Now, if y'all want to see a full tuning video on a carburetor, I would be happy to do that. That Galaxy right there has two 750 double pumpers on it. I can reach in the window, bump the switch, and that car cranks right up. Just as pretty as a modern fuel injection car. It's because it is tuned correctly. Now, back to this. Now, if you do all the math and your car only draws 550 CFM, which means that's about all the carburetor you need. If it draws 550, probably a 650 would, or not a 650, I'm sorry. If it draws 550, probably a 600 would be the optimal option. If you were going out today to purchase a brand new carburetor, 600 would probably be the optimal option. But if you've got a 750 laying on the shelf, put that 750 on it, tweak the jets a little bit, reach over and dial her in on the idle circuit a little bit, get the transfer slot set. Again, we can go in all that in a different one. That thing will run like an absolute charm. It will run so sweet, you'll never have an issue out of it. Here's my theory that I've always went with. If, like the wagon, which is not running at 950 now, I actually loaned it out to a buddy of mine for his race car. But if, like that 950 that was on that 302, I now have that carburetor on there. I don't have it on there now, but I had that carburetor on there. So if I wanted to change heads, if I wanted to change cam, if I want to do any of this stuff later in the future, the carburetor's already there. It just takes a little tweaking, a little more dialing in for the new combination, and it runs. So I have something up here that allows me to do anything I want to down here, and I can always make sure I feed it. You understand what I'm saying? And you need to understand the terms can. How much airflow it can pull. How much fuel it can pull. That does not mean it will pull. If it's not pulling that much airflow, then it's not going to pull fuel out of the bowls the same, which means you have to jet for the different suction effect, I guess is how you would refer to it in a layman's terms. You have to jet for that. Now, there's going to be a lot of pushback on this because there's people that have went by that theory all their life. And all they know is what the internet has told them, and the internet has told them that this is the way it works. And if that's the theory you want to go by, that's fine. You're not hurting anything by running a smaller carburetor as long as it's that number or more. If your car can only draw 600 CFMs, as long as you're running at least a 600 or bigger, you're not hurting anything. You run smaller, you're choking power out of it. But the car would still run if you tune the carburetor correctly. You follow me down this. It's all in the tuning of the carburetor, not the size. It does not matter what size carburetor you put on one, you can tune it to run on any engine. It's just not going to, basically it's not going to use all of what it's got, but it's there. You understand me so far? I'm not losing anyone so far. It's just a simple suction effect. An engine at its heart is an air pump. An engine sucks air through the carburetor, through the intake. The engine sucks air through there into the combustion chamber, and then it blows air out the tailpipe. Suck, bang, blow. So basically, all an engine is an air pump. Think of it as this. You have a hole on top of the intake. Let's call the carburetor a hole. You have a hole of a certain size on top of the intake. That hole allows so much air to go through. If that engine can only draw 600, if that air pump under there can only pull 600 CFM of air, it don't matter if the hole's this big or if the hole's this big. As long as this hole is 650 CFMs, doesn't matter if it's this big, that pump will still only pull 650 or whatever it was I said, CFMs. That's all it's going to pull. You can't make the engine pull more just because you put a bigger hole on top of it. It's only going to pull what it's going to pull. Now, the pushback on that is, well, if it only draws 600 CFMs, why do you need a 800 CFM carburetor on one? Well, you don't. You don't. But at the end of the day, you're not hurting it by doing that as long as you tune it for that. And you tune it for that based off of jet changes, idle circuit changes, different things. And we'll go into a tuning video later. Squirters, accelerator pumps, there's different ones of those. You can do all these things to dial in squirters, all this stuff to dial into the performance of a carburetor. Little cams on the gear, all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about strictly airflow. So, no, you're not hurting an engine by doing it. So if you want to take your bone stock 350 Chevrolet, 351 Windsor, you want to take your bone stock engine and you want to put 2 4-barrels on it, go ahead. You're not going to hurt that engine. But you will hurt that engine if you put 2 4-barrels on it right out of the box, because they're jetted way bigger than what you need. You're going to have to jet them way down. That thing will run reliably. It will start every time you touch the switch, and it's going to be smooth and probably get decent fuel mileage. Most time the reason people get piss poor fuel mileage is because they haven't tuned their carburetor right. That ramp truck out there with a 460 in it, the first thing everybody says, well, there's 4 miles a gallon. There's 4 miles a gallon. There's 4 miles a gallon. I got that thing home. I tuned on the old carburetor a little bit, tweaked the timing a little bit. That bitch gets 10 miles a gallon with the car on the back of it. Now, I know that's not astronomical fuel mileage, but it ain't no 4 miles to the gallon either. It's all in how you tune the carburetor. There's a lot of things on these that affect fuel flow, and that affect fuel mileage, and that affect performance, that affect all these things. But one thing that does not affect anything is the rumor of over-carbureting a car or an engine. Over-carbureting is not a thing. Again, I know there's people out there that lived and died their entire life by that theory. But I've actually put it to the test. I've actually taken back to back to back. And again, you can watch the videos if you go back. There's videos where we first got a VRS. We took 3 carburetors back to back to back and put them on, I think it was the Cougar. Little tweaking. Car ran phenomenal. Now the VRS made more power, but there's a whole lot more to that. Annular boosters and the shape of the Venturis, and there's a whole lot of stuff behind why that carburetor made more power. But at the end of the day, every carburetor we put on it, you could reach in there, bump switch, it would crank right up. Plugs were good and clean. It wasn't loading up on fuel, wasn't smoking, wasn't doing any of this old wives' tale stuff that you hear about over-carbureting. And on that wagon I've tested, that wagon has had a 500 CFM carburetor on it. It has had a 750 CFM carburetor on it. It had the 950 on it, and it's back to a 750 now, just again because I really like that 750 VRS. It has had multiple carburetors on it. Every one of them, I've gotten right around that 20 miles a gallon mark. Every one of them starts smooth, runs smooth, highway, idle, it doesn't matter. All about tuning. Now, I understand people are always going to believe the myth of over-carburation. They're out there. They're going to believe that. And that's fine, because honestly, they're not hurting anything by putting the proper size carburetor for your application on the engine. They're not hurting it. But what they are doing is if they ever decide to do anything else to the engine, they're going out and buying another carburetor because they need one that's a proper size for the new application. You know what I'm saying? Compression fits in on it. And honestly, I've built enough engines around here. Different combinations just like different things. It's not as simple as the math says that according to the cubic inches and the compression of the engine, that this is the amount of CFMs that it can. Listen, different engines just like different things. Some engines wake up with a different carburetor on it. I know that 390 I had in that thing right there, every time I put a bigger carburetor on it, the car ran faster. It just wanted more air. It wasn't it needed more fuel, it just wanted more air. Of course, with airflow comes fuel, of course, but the car was just being choked. But according to the math on the internet, when we do the figuring, that car only wanted 650 or 670 CFMs is all that engine needed. Listen, there's always going to be people who debate things. I understand that. In this video, we'll get a lot of debate. But what I'm telling you is a guy that has constantly tested this stuff. I am a die-hard carburetor guy. I don't really care much for fuel injection. I have ran every kind of carburetor you can think of, whether it be the old Carters, the Carter-style Elderbrox, the single Hollies, the dual feed Hollies, the double pumpers, the VRS. Now, I've ran about every kind of carburetor you can think of. I even got a Summit brand carburetor that I ran for a while. And I can tell you that the whole over-carburetion thing is complete hogwash. It is complete garbage. The only reason you would over-carburate an engine is because you don't tune it. If you throw a 750, 800 CFM carburetor with 80 jets squared in it onto a stock 305, yeah, you've over-carbureted the piss out of it, but it has nothing to do with the carburetor. It has to do with the tuning of that carburetor. You spend a little time, you could dial that carburetor in where that engine would run just as smooth as silk. But what happens is people bolt it on there, fire it up, they smell gas, it's got smoke coming out of it, the plugs are all fouled out. Oh, well, it's too much carburetor, too much carburetor, too much carburetor, too much carburetor. No, it's a lack of tuning. I'm going to have to invent a shirt. Lack of tuning is your issue. Just a talking point today, guys. You let me know what you think, but I'm telling you from my experience, I've never seen yet an over-carbureted vehicle. I've never seen it possible yet. I had go way back in the archives. I had a 68 Torino with a tunnel ram on it and 2 4 barrels on it on not only a bone stock 302, a bone stock 302 that probably had 1 billion miles on it because it's the original motor of the car. Little tuning on them things. Not only was she happy, it actually ran pretty doggone good and looked silly cool going down the road. It can be done, guys. It can be done. You just have to spend time with it. And I know carburetors are outdated. You should go fuel injection, blah, blah, blah. Modern technology. And my mama said, listen, I've tested them. I've seen it firsthand. It's all in the tuning. This is a quick, short video for a little something that really I've talked about quite a lot, and it's to the point where I keep seeing more and more people talk about over-carbureting an engine. It's absolute hogwash, and I just wanted to put my 2 cents worth on it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to believe in it. We can have an open discussion. We don't have to be mean or rude to each other. I'm just telling you, this is what I found in my, God, it's hard to believe, in my, what is it now, 35 years of fooling with carburetors. Is that right? Is that math right? 5, 7, yeah, about 35 years of fooling with carburetors. This is what I've come to learn over the years. And again, I've ran about every kind of carburetor you can think of, and I've seen every kind of carburetor flood an engine. I've seen every kind overfuel an engine, and I've seen every kind run good on an engine. I've seen 2-barrel carburetors that would flood going down the road because it was getting too much fuel. You're going to tell me a little 350 CFM carburetor is too much for a big block? But it was flooding it. Fouling plugs out. You could smell the fuel out the exhaust, but it wasn't tuned properly. All in the tuning, folks. Hey, just be kind to each other. And hopefully you pick up a little something along the way. If you would be interested in seeing a full tuning video on how to really dial in a carburetor, drop it in the comments and let me know. It's just been a rainy, pissy week, and I'm trying to get these engines right here on the run stand, and I like to push them outside to run them, so, you know, I'm not blowing exhaust in my face. And with the weather the way it's been, I haven't been able to do that. So I wanted to get you some content out there. Hopefully nobody busted a blood vessel. Hopefully nobody lost their voice from screaming. And hopefully a few of you understand where I'm coming from. I know there's going to be some carburetor guru in the comments that goes, everything you said is completely wrong and you can flood one to death. Listen, again, I have ran every kind of, I take my time when I go to swap meets and garage sales and everything. And if there is one of these laying around for cheap, I buy it. I don't even care what CFM it is or anything, because I know eventually I'm going to have to rebuild that carburetor and put it on something, some kind of junk to get it running to get it home. I've dealt with them for years, and this is my experience. God bless you guys. I hope the Lord bless you more today than he did yesterday. To him be the glory. Guys, remember, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all those things. And we'll see you on the next one, where hopefully all these engines are on the run stand running. And each one of these have a different CFM carburetor on them too, by the way. That one's got two, I think they're 550s on it. That one's got a 650 on it. I think that one's got a 600 on it. You know why? Because they were laying on a shelf and they'll work fine to crank it up and run it on the run stand. We'll tune them.
I'd say it's a nut job.